Hello and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest this week is Fahima Haque, audience editor for the New York Times National Desk. And our host is back, Sri Srinivasan. You can find him on Twitter at Sri, is back in the big chair. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer and occasional guest host. I'm thrilled to be back in the producer's chair today. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, our Digimentors website, and Instagram. Instagram is new for us. So if you're watching on Instagram, thank you very much for joining us there. Please like, please comment, please share, please retweet. Do all the things you do on social so that other people have a chance to watch the show. We're going to have a great conversation today with in terms of Fahima is going to explain the work that she does, but effectively, her job is to make the Times, the national desk that she's on, more accessible to readers in all the places, all the ways they might access uh, journalism. So we're looking forward to hearing about that. We'll hear about her work helping working with others to improve headlines. She's also the editor of Race Related, a great newsletter that comes out. So there's a lot to talk about. We also have on our website last week's 52 Places to Go. We have the PDF of that special. And we have a special section that's in this week's paper, How Do I Pay for College? So there's a lot to cover, and we're looking forward to the conversation. Let's go ahead and say hi to some of the folks that are watching today. Doug Levy, who was our guest at the beginning of the year, is joining us from California. He didn't mention California, but I'm assuming he's still in California at 5:30 Eastern. Sorry, 5:30 Pacific time. Thank you so much. And we have Linda Lawrence joining us, saying good morning from Long Island. I'm strapped in donating blood. I think it's the first time we've ever had a viewer donating blood at the same time as watching the show. I think it might actually top my mom, who logged in after flying back from India and logged in from the taxi from the airport. Linda, talk about dedication. That's incredible. And Naomi is offering frigid greetings from the Upper West Side. Naomi, thank you so much. With that, we'll bring in our host, Sri Srinivasan. Sri, good morning.
Good morning, Neil, and good morning, everybody. Great to be back with all of you. Happy 2024 to everyone. This is going to be a crazy news year. It already has been in many ways, but with the elections in America and in so many other countries, there's going to be a lot of attention being paid to the news, and we need to be doing that. Welcome to the New York Times Read Along. We're delighted to bring you a conversation with the National Audience's editor of the New York Times, and you will meet Fahima Haque in just a bit. And if you're joining us for the first time, we do this every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We look at the news and we talk with fascinating guests. And we won a little award at the end of last year, so I just wanted to show you this. This is the W3 Silver Award for podcasting. And Neil and Paula and Carla, we're very proud of the chance to be recognized for this work. So Neil, congrats to you.
Thank you, and thanks to you, Sri, for the community you've built up over the last 8.5 years of the read along. You started with Facebook Live, just aiming your phone at the newspaper when you were back at Columbia, when it was new media. What's this Facebook Live? And what was interesting is at the time, in the early days, we used to do a lot more explaining of the tech, of how we were, going live and the different features, etc. And certainly the show has evolved. I've been working with you for about 6.5 years now. Started off sharing links to articles while you were doing the show, and the fun part. I used to bug Sri because I didn't know whether we were going to go live until it was until 8:30 Sunday morning. Whether or not I'd roll over and look for the show, and if it was on, great. If not, So I said, "Hey, Sri, it'd be great if you could promote the show early so we'd know." And Sri, I don't know if you remember your response. You're like, "Great idea, you do it." And
Exactly. And here we are now. We get to work together. This is actually produced as part of our work for Digimentors, the company that we're part of. And we do all kinds of things. We make shows like this for other people, podcasts and events and seminars, workshops. We'd love to talk to you about that. But we also do digital marketing, strategic communications, trainings, and workshops. I do my non-scary guide to AI workshops, and we also help recruit digital folks for companies. And there's my non-scary practical guide to generative AI, ChatGPT, etc. You can see I once upon a time used to have hair, and that's why I'm at 25 years of teaching. You can see also how technology has changed and how computers have changed. So we're delighted to produce this as part of our work at Digimentors. We'd love to work with you, so get in touch with us. Neil at Digimentors.group or Sri at Digimentors.group. And we also want to thank our sponsors, MuckRack, for always being supportive of us. And if you'd like to be a sponsor, please get in touch. We'd love to have you involved with us. And if you're watching, please tag your friends, tell them about the show. They can watch us live or later. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, as well as Digimentors.group. And we'll be live until 10 a.m. Eastern, and then the show will just start automatically on those same channels so you can watch. And we're also on Neil's Instagram. So if you can find Neil Parekh on Instagram, you can be there. And that's exciting that we're able to do that.
I want to give a shout out. Our friend Stefan Kaplan is watching on Instagram, giving us a shout out there. So if folks are watching on Instagram, thank you very much. The way Instagram works, we're live on Instagram, but the video, it'll take a little while after the show is over for me to put the video on my Instagram page for others to watch. But stay tuned for that on all other channels, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on our website. You can watch from the beginning, almost just a few minutes after the show is over. Instagram, it'll take me about a half hour or so to get the graphics and the write up done, download, upload the video, etc. A little bit more, little back to the explaining, Sri. Back to the explaining.
And we've got great folks watching from all over. Here's Dr. Tachi watching from Fort Lauderdale. Speaking of Instagram, she has a great show on Instagram. Sudha Parekh, Neil's mom, is watching from the cold weather in Tampa. In New York, just so everybody knows, we're at 20 degrees Fahrenheit, -7 Celsius. So super cold here. And there's Stefan. We're saying hi to him. Greenie says, good morning from Manhattan, enjoying a cup of joe with you. That's lovely. And Paula Kiger, longtime producer of the show, is watching from 28 degrees in Florida, Tallahassee. And Dr. Tachi says, congrats to the New York Times Read Along team. And our old friend Pradnya Haldipur is here watching from Springfield, Maryland, and says, Sumirza says it's Uncle Sri's show, Sri Uncle Show. And Doug Levy is watching, as we said already, from California, where it's 5:30 in the morning. And Greenie is curious about this read-along format. So what we're going to do is we're going to just very quickly look at the headlines in the newspaper, and then we're going to bring on Fahima to talk with us. And here we'll just quickly just glance at the various sections. This is the front page of the New York Times, and you can see the lead stories about Israel and more about the elections, and inside the crusade against DEI. Real estate cover is dizzying times for home seekers. The Metropolitan cover is a giant step to an offshore energy future. And Arts and Leisure is still feeling the pull of Happy Days. 5 decades have passed since the sitcom that I loved as a kid first aired. And it's also, by the way, the 25th anniversary of The Sopranos. So maybe it'd be fun to hear people talk about The Sopranos or Happy Days. And how do I pay for college, and is it worth it? This is a special section of the New York Times. The online version, some of you may have seen last fall. Here is the Sunday business cover. Farmers had it, billionaires wanted it. In California, a group of tech leaders aims to build a city from scratch. So that will be obviously controversial. And the Sunday Styles cover is Facing the wilds in stealth mode, weekend warriors prepare for scary times. Interesting story for the style section. And the Sunday opinion, Bill was a good man, then he committed a terrible crime. A friend and a life as complicated as America. And this is Nick Kristoff's uh, cover story in Sunday Opinion. And the business cover from yesterday, I just wanted to show you. This was quite dramatic. This is from the Saturday paper. Stock market climbs to new height. And you can see all the bull markets here. And I think we're just a couple of other, so many sections. Who says print is dead, at least at the New York Times? The print magazine is how do you solve a problem like Vladimir? And this is the whale who went AWOL. So that's fascinating. Neil and I, by the way, you can find this in our archives at digimentors.group. We went to the New York Times and read the Sunday magazine with Jake Silverstein, the editor of the magazine. That was lots of fun. And the book review cover, To Die For, in his debut novel Martyr, the poet Kaveh Akbar turns a grieving young man's search for meaning into a piercing family saga. So that's going to be a fascinating book here, and it's reviewed by Junot Diaz, the great writer. So we have a lot to talk about in the paper today, and we are excited to bring you a fabulous guest from the New York Times who's going to join us and tell us all about her work as well as discussing the news. That's Fahima Haque, audiences editor at the New York Times National Desk. Please, everyone, welcome Fahima.
Hi, how are you doing?
How are you? Great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Sri, and Neil, of course.
Really appreciate your time. I have to ask, are you a Sunday morning person?
I can be. This is definitely a little like this start is a little earlier than I normally would. I usually have a slightly sleep in. But the sun's out, even though it's cold, although I like the winter. So yeah, I'm gonna say I'm a Sunday morning person.
It's fine to say you like the winter, but do you like this winter is the question.
Honestly, it hasn't been that cold. It's just been a week of cold weather. It's going to be warm again in like 2 days. Yeah, I think it's fine. But I know
I
many people will vehemently disagree with me.
Yeah, you have a cat, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
she will probably jump into the frame. Anytime she hears people talking, she's like, "Excuse me, your attention is not on me." So,
Well, the reason I brought up your cat is because we have a dog, and the dog needs to be walked 3 times a day. So
oh
I
wow,
think dog owners have a different appreciation and view of winter than cat owners who
that's
don't.
very fair. I would be annoyed if I had to step out 3 times a day. So.
Yeah. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for spending your time. We have lots of questions coming in. And here's greetings, by the way, from Ken Fisher, who's watching from Iowa on a spinner bike in my yoga room, he says. Welcome. So we have somebody who's watching who's donating blood at the moment. And we have somebody on his bike. I'm sure others are doing interesting things. Tell us how your Sunday's going, folks, and where you are in the world. We'd love for you to say hello. Sudha, Neil's mom in Tampa, is talking about how cold it is there as well.
I'm going to jump in, Sri,
Yeah, yeah.
because every week this is my chance to say hi to my mom. So, hi, mom. And yes, we do talk other, more than just on the show. But it's really nice to be able to say hi to her every week. So thanks for letting me jump in.
Yeah, and this is a great excuse that you have. You've talked to her for the week, but you do have to. You've got that one hello in at least, and everything else is gravy after that.
Exactly.
I
I'll
was
let her
about
know
to
you
say,
said that.
maybe for American parents, but I'm like, I don't know, that would not be enough for my parents.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
not enough for my mom either, but
yeah,
okay.
your folks are New Yorkers. You were born in New York, in
Yeah, I
Queens.
was born in Queens, born and raised, still live in Queens. And my parents moved here from Bangladesh in the late 70s to Elmhurst, and they're still there.
And what a journey it has been for specifically the Bangladeshi community that was, there were not that many Bangladeshis here when they arrived. And now we see large concentrations of Bangladeshis in New York, outside Detroit, so many other places.
It's very cool. My dad always says when he came here, he was a pioneer and the first in the neighborhood, which I know he appreciates the title that he's given himself, but it's great to see that they're not the only ones anymore.
Yeah, that's lovely. Patty is watching. It says greetings from New York, and Dr. Tachi says I love Neil's mom is the official mom of the New York Times read along. That's fantastic. And we had a question about I mentioned both. It's the 50th anniversary of Happy Days and the 25th anniversary of The Sopranos. And Pradnya says when I lived in Kentucky, I used to watch The Sopranos because it was so Jersey. It reminded me of home. Do you have a preference of those shows?
Me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I tried to get into Sopranos, and every time, like, I was shocked how funny it was too, but I still have not really gotten past. I think I've watched 2 episodes, embarrassingly, and I definitely watched Happy Days growing up. It was always on TV. I can't remember if it was Nick at Night or what channel it was on. So I would probably pick, I mean, this is gonna be embarrassing. I guess I'm gonna pick Happy Days over Sopranos, and I know people literally consider it, like, the best show that's ever been on air, but
Exactly.
eventually I will watch it.
Good. And that's what one of the things that I hadn't seen Succession, and I was in an event where it was all about Succession, and people first booed me when I said I hadn't seen it, but then somebody said they were jealous that I had Succession in front of me, all of it to watch. So I feel the same way about Breaking Bad for people who haven't seen it, that I'm jealous that they still get to see it and and Better Call Saul and the shows like that. So, folks, what we're going to do with Fahima is talk a little bit about her work, her career, and then we're going to read the paper together and get her insights about what's it like to work at the Times. What is the job of the audiences editors? There are multiple audiences editors, and why is it audiences, plural? And we will take your questions about working at the Times, about issues in journalism. And we do this every Sunday because we believe in the power of journalism, accurate information, fighting disinformation, misinformation. And so, why don't we start, Fahima, by you telling us a little bit about just that title, and what is the work that you do?
Yeah, so it's funny. Audience editing, being an audience editor can mean so many different things. It at its core, it's the idea of getting as many readers as possible to read our work. That's the basic rule. But the way in which we get there can be it can go lots of different routes. So, of course, we want stories that are compelling, accurately reported, like you said. But my job specifically, I'm thinking about, okay, are we thinking about all the right, are we thinking about different reader perspectives? Are we thinking about engaging headlines? Are we thinking about thoughtful promotion? Are we thinking about we do a lot of reader call outs, like we call them, user generated reporting. So it's lots of different things, which this is why I love my job, because there's never you never know what day you're going to have. It can look like lots of different things. That's the idea, just getting as many readers as possible interested in our work.
And I love the framing of audiences rather than just audience. So, talk about that. A lot of other places use the word audience. So, talk about audiences.
Yeah, that one's kind of funny. So that's specific to the national desk. So when I first joined the desk, Mark Lacey was running it. Now it's Gia Lin Yang. Both are wonderful. They've been at the Times for a while. But Mark and I, when we were talking about my role and me joining the desk, we kept thinking, well, so much of the times we want to think about multiple audiences. We want to think about new audiences, diverse audiences, younger ones. I mean, that's something that has come up a lot in journalism. And I say this with a lot of respect, that the Times, we want to see younger, more diverse readers. That's been a goal for a goal of mine. I mean, fundamentally in this role. And so Mark and I, when we talked about it, we're like, yeah, we want different audiences. So it's such a minor thing, but it's funny that you picked up on it, because that was what we had in mind, to really embrace the idea of lots of different types of readers.
Thank you. Let's see. Comments are coming in. Miriam says, I'm watching from Hell's Kitchen, and also sends greetings to you. Diana is watching from the Bay Area. Again, it's 5:49 a.m. there. Ellen's watching from the Upper East Side. And Pradnya is doing something that I recommend everyone do. Tag a friend on one of the platforms, and they can watch this later. And she's tagged Lynn and she's tagged Crystal, and we would love for you to do that. And anyone watching, just hit share right now on the platform you're on. We're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and on Digimentors.group as well. So you can see lots of great stuff on that Digimentors website. Vincent said, just read a column in a newspaper here in India advising seniors to dig into Sudoku puzzles. Does the New York Times have special sections or online for seniors there? And so before you answer that, I will just give a shout out to the Times work on gaming and puzzles. It's been an enormous boon to the Times, all the work that's been done there. I mean, people know things like Wordle, but so many games are part of how the Times has taken the crossword puzzle business that it's been in for decades and then added lots and lots of new games on there. So, Fahima, can you specify what the Times is doing for seniors? Are they doing things? They used to be, of course, the large print edition and things like that. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, I am honestly, I don't know that, but when I don't know something, it makes me want to look it up and see what maybe we are working on. So that's the thing. I mean, the Times is so huge that I also wouldn't be surprised if folks in the building are thinking about, well, how do we increase accessibility to our older readers or create something that's really with them at the forefront, with them in mind.
Great. And Pradya is talking about Wordle and Spelling Bee as well. Miriam says, Fahima, I like the colors in your room. Assume it's the living room.
Yeah. I moved into this place a couple months ago or in August, and I knew I wanted to have bright colors.
That's wonderful. Susan says, good morning from Chile, Connecticut, where I now live full time. I really miss my city walks with the dog, so I go out with her and we walk about in the yard. I'm always jealous of people who live with backyards because the dogs can just go out by themselves. And Jonathan says, belated greetings from the East Village, where he's a really bad cold. Jonathan, I would take a cold any day compared to so many folks seem to be sick. I don't know, Fahima, what it's like in your circles, but so many people we know are sick with COVID or flu or something else.
Yeah, it's been, I mean, honestly, I'm lucky that I will keep continuing and not being sick, but it's been, yeah, it's just been a rough go of it for people.
Sure. Aisha is watching from St. Louis. Folks, check out Aisha Sultan's latest column. She's a syndicated columnist, and she wrote about the Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley campaigns and what she's learned from watching them. And Spelling Bee has introduced my kids and nephews to the New York Times and demanded to have the app on their iPads. And we can now show we're seeing Aisha's tweet from Twitter, and there's a new feature that StreamYard has that we can show comments from Twitter as well. We couldn't do that in years past. So there was a question here. You mentioned younger audiences. So the question was, how do you go about recruiting younger audiences, attracting younger audiences?
Yeah, I mean, this is the question anytime, like this question comes up anytime we think about how do we attract an audience that we normally don't. And it's a dissatisfying answer. There is no silver bullet. Like I think anyone who tells you that this is exactly how you can go about something as like nuanced as getting younger readers interested in a legacy newspaper, this idea that, people look at the Times and they sometimes can feel like it's stayed, it's super old school. And I think for us on national, we just want to keep telling really good stories and telling stories from places that we don't necessarily always report from, or on ideas that we don't necessarily report on. And I think it's just being really open-minded and thinking, well, maybe 5 years ago, we wouldn't have thought this is a quote Time story, but why is that? Is there a way that we can approach it that makes sense for us, and it also helps illuminate and untangle whatever it is that we're talking about for a reader? So I do think about young readers, and I think about, different readers, but I also, at the core of what we do, it's just telling a really good story and using perspectives that we wouldn't maybe necessarily thinking about the wide range of perspectives of people you quote from, or who are you framing the story around. So I think it's a lot about that big picture thinking that ultimately does yield different readers.
Excellent. We have lots of comments coming in, but we wanted to get a sense of your work kind of on a daily basis. And you've brought us some stories that we're going to show folks, and then you're going to kind of explain how your work intersects with the reporters, the writers, editors, etc., on these kinds of stories.
Yeah, so this story is a really fun one. And it was actually it was A1 today as well. It was just below the fold. So this is part of our, this is called Across the Country. It's this really cool feature that we started in 2022, so pretty recent. And it was this idea of wanting to, there's my cat, wanting to get to places across the country that we don't, again, necessarily report from. Or barring like a breaking news moment where we're there because of an unfortunate shooting or a disaster. And we wanted to really capture and acknowledge the joy of this country, which, on our desk, we joke, it's not always the most, it's joyful people that I work with, but the news itself can be rough. So we thought about this idea of dispatches from towns across the country, and it's very visually reported. So you'll see at the top, there's always a byline for photographers as well, because the visual aspect of this feature is really key to the enjoyment of the story. And so we try to publish and across the country in ATC pretty much every week. And thus far, while this story is focused on New England, we've written stories from everywhere from California, Texas, New Mexico, Missouri, Kentucky. It's just one of my favorite features that we work on, and readers love it. Because I do think it helps you understand, well, what's going on in a community outside of mine, because that's the whole idea of trying to understand a place you probably have never been to, especially a smaller town, right? Like a lot of us have probably been to California and Texas, but not these smaller towns where something so distinct and idiosyncratic is happening. So for this story, I had wanted to talk about it because, I do a lot of work with headlines, and, a lot of the time you can think of a really great headline on your own in 15, 20 minutes, but a lot of the time you can't. I certainly can't always do that. And so we, as a group of editors, on our desk, and with the reporters as well, we try to encourage as much brainstorming as possible. And this happens across the newsroom. I know the Metro desk is fantastic at this. I'm just really thinking like, well, if we have all of these smart people, we should be thinking about the headline, because that's the entry point for the reader, right? If you see something, that's all of us. If you see something that feels like, oh, okay, you're going to want to click on it. So this one, I wanted us to discuss it because it's such a great, very wacky story. I had never heard of this tradition across hundreds of New England towns. This used to be a very distinct tradition of once you become one of the oldest residents in the town that you're in, you get this ornate cane. And it started with this old publisher of a newspaper in New England. And it's just this, you wouldn't, I would imagine you wouldn't know of this as a tradition unless if you lived in one of these towns. But now this ornate cane, older folks are just not as keen on taking it on. They feel like it's proof of their frailty. They're worried it's a scam. There's this idea of a curse that once you take the cane, that's when you start to have health problems. So all of this, it's really hard to, how do you capture that in a story? Because, I started the opening conversation on Friday, and I'll be honest, my headlines were pretty boring. They were pretty straightforward. I was trying to find a clever way in, and I was struggling. So I put it to the group of like, hey guys, these are a couple of rough ideas, but I would love to hear your thoughts. And Tammy Audi, our enterprise editor, she jumped in, and this was her idea. And we all immediately were like, we love this. This is so funny. This is so sharp. And I don't think it's necessarily like glib or anything. I think it strikes the right tone of cheeky enough where you're like, wait, what? Canes, old people, towns? And it's just it really was proof of what happens when you have a conversation as a group, because I certainly couldn't have thought of that headline, and she did. I mean, it makes me really happy. So I think it was just a great example of that kind of teamwork for a story that required something that I think would have been just boring to have a straight headline.
So, Fahima, I have a quick question about that in terms of, you mentioned, what kind of headline will get the most attention. Can you speak to headlines online versus print?
Yeah.
Are you
So I was
involved in
going to
that?
show, sure,
Yeah.
here's the paper headline, "To Town Elders, a Gift of a Cane Steeped in Lore." And let's just compare it to the other headline, which says,
Right.
"Congratulations, you're the oldest person in town. Please accept this cane." And I will say that I had a conversation a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, with Rich Jaroslavsky, who ran the Wall Street Journal online edition, and he said that they deliberately did different headlines almost always on major stories because of SEO and other concerns. So I think Neil's question is great about how do you think about those two headlines?
But Sri, can you actually flip to the jump on the article inside? Because what I've seen a lot of times is that the inside headline is actually the main headline from the online version. It's like the full headline, where it's
Yeah,
obviously the front page of
I
the
don't
story.
think that that's the case here. In this case, it's
New
uh,
England 10 elders, a gift to Cain steeped
they
in.
just they just they just echoed what's on the front.
Got it. So yeah, Fahim, if you could speak to that, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, I mean, our amazing print layout folks, they are often thinking about, I mean, they're thinking about space in the paper. They're thinking about the print reader. So the headlines are not always different. At least I don't believe so. This one, I was not involved in the print headline, but I do think that makes sense because you want, I mean, given the space, you want it to be shorter, you want it to be a little more straightforward. I also think that when it comes to SEO, so we have online, we have a different field for SEO headlines, which is really helpful. Like this, we knew wasn't going to be a search focused story. No one's looking for this, or not in droves. So there is no specific SEO headline for it. Had this been a newsier story like the rest of the paper, there was a lot of stories about Uvalde. That those stories, it makes sense where it's like, okay, people are searching for something because something, a news event happened this week. So it's a lot of nuance. I mean, it's thinking about what, like, I think an online reader, you have to click on the story, but if you're already in the paper, I think the headline's just as important, but you're thinking about the entire package, right? You're looking at the photos right there. You already, by purchasing the paper, by choosing to read it, you've already clicked into it, so to speak, right? So I do think there is a different approach, that a headline in the newspaper can be a bit more straightforward, perhaps. And you know what, Pradnya, you're right. That means search engine optimization. It's this idea of writing a headline that really speaks to what people are searching for. Obviously, most of us use Google, but thinking about, okay, yeah, if I'm a person who wants to understand, like, yeah, the Uvalde report, DOJ dropped the 600-page report. What am I typing into my search field to help me understand? And we have a team of awesome experts. I mean, the SEO team, they handle so much of that work. I'm definitely, like, I learn from them. I often pass along their wisdom to the national desk. I think about those things on my own as well. But they are certainly the experts, and we're lucky to be a big enough newsroom, honestly, to have people who focus on that solely for us as a newsroom.
Excellent. Rahajan is watching from Fork River, New Jersey. Catch a replay later. Everyone, please stay safe and strong. Thank you, Rahajan. Great thought from you. You brought along a story or example of an explainer. So you're going to explain the explainer to us, where reparations stand in the U.S. This is from the race-related section.
Yeah, so Adil Hassan wrote it, and he writes a lot of our explainers. He's so good at parsing out a really complicated, ongoing news event and really making it simple for the reader. So I'm sure a lot of you all have read our explainers. We call them service journalism, and the idea is thinking about, okay, something sprawling is happening in the news. How do I even get caught up, right? It can feel really confusing, especially if it's an ongoing trial, right? A shooting, extreme weather, a moment, a disaster, something that's like unfolding across several days, weeks, months. And our job is to say, okay, if you're a reader who knows nothing about this topic or very little and you want to learn more, then how do we make it as clear as possible? And so this came out of Adil and I having many conversations of last year. Yeah, last year there was a lot going on in terms of the idea of reparations as a possibility, especially out of California. Ultimately, what the task force in the state hasn't really yielded anything, which we knew that to be the case, but there kept being all these updates. And New York had some traction as well. And we were thinking, well, if I'm a reader, I'm trying to understand this idea, like, is this really going to be a possibility? What does this mean for my tax dollar? Or like, what is happening? And so this one was definitely complicated because we wanted to get in so much information. But again, if an explainer is 2,500 words, is that really helpful? The whole point is to be concise and really thinking about, smart subheads. We call them like, what are reparations? Like thinking, we want to make it really scannable for a reader. So it's like, yeah, I have a couple of minutes. Please just help me understand what I need to know. And we ended up working on this for a while because we really wanted to get it right. And we worked with other reporters who had covered reparations and making sure that we were asking the right questions. And when you ask these questions in these subheads, you want to answer them, right? You want to make it feel satisfying for the reader. I think all of us, it would be embarrassing to write something that says, okay, definitively, here's your answer to this question you have. And then you're left being like, well, they didn't answer this. Like that's a waste of not just a waste of a click, but that also creates distrust in a reader and does not inspire loyalty. I feel that way. If I open something and I feel like I was shortchanged, I'm not going to want to go to that outlet again, or I'm going to think twice about it. So we really want our explainers, and we have them on so many different topics, everything from how to prepare your home, in the storm and all this cold weather, like freezing pipes. That was a big search term, which I get. That's something growing up, my parents always stressed out about, to what was the Elijah McClain trial, like what's happening with that. So really, I mean, you can explain anything, and we want to make it where our readers know, I have a question, I can come to the New York Times and they're going to answer it for me.
And that's, of course, you're doing that really, really well. And look what Patty says. Love the innovative way to catch up with breaking news. Amazing. So please pass that on to your colleagues as well. Folks, you're joining a conversation with me, Sri Srinivasan, and that's Fahima Haque, who is the national audiences editor at the New York Times. And we're talking about her work, the work of her team, and we're also going to be reading the print paper with her in just a couple of more minutes. She's got some more stories she's going to show us. So next we're going to see a story called A Love Letter to Hip Hop. Hip Hop repeatedly taught a community, then a nation, then the world how to dream.
Yeah, so this is another race-related example, which everyone should subscribe if you haven't. It's a weekly newsletter that comes out Saturday mornings at 7, and it's about race. And we often use stories from around the newsroom, but we also have original reporting and essays. This one was a unique example that Veronica Chambers, who is the editor of, I think it's now called Narrative Projects, I want to say, but she
Former
is
guest on the show.
yeah, she is wonderful. And what I often do is when I see a really cool project or interactive or series published in the newsroom, I go to the person who either wrote it or edited it and then ask them, hey, would you want to write something for our newsletter that helps pull back the curtain for the reader? Explain to me how this story came about, how this process, how you reported or edited on the story that published. So this was a beautiful feature that was in her section about, it was celebrating 50 years of hip hop. And I thought, well, if you have some time, I would love for you to write a little bit about the project. And it's usually short, it's meant to be as, little details left maybe on the cutting room floor, something that the reader could take away with and say, oh, that's really cool. I didn't know that. And now if I can go and click ahead and read the story. And it's a really great way of introducing something that, you see these big projects, but you don't always know how it happened. And so she's done this a few times for us. Real Estate's done this a few times. Matt Thompson from The Headway, our initiative that really looks at how progress is happening or is not happening in the country. They've all been really great, really game to take time out of their day to write something. And I do feel readers really enjoy it. And this was just a beautiful story that I wanted to give even more attention to in our newsletter.
Thank you. Carla says, good morning from Cape Coral, Florida. Let's do one more story from your collection that you've brought to us. This city had quietly celebrated Pride before. In 2023, that was not an option after right-wing activists portrayed a Pride event in Franklin, Tennessee as a threat to children. The small city unexpectedly found itself at the center of a backlash.
Yeah, this story was from Emily Cochran. She is a correspondent covering the South out of Nashville. And I really enjoyed this story for a couple of reasons. One, she reported it with a lot of sensitivity and a lot of awareness, writing about a community that she is not a part of herself. But also, when we had a conversation, we talked about her wanting to jump in the comments, because we knew not every story the comments are open on. Our wonderful comments team, they make that decision, and they do a really good job of monitoring the comments to make sure that space remains a safe one and a productive one, both for readers and reporters. But Emily had wanted to jump in the comments and start talking with readers. So this was a Saturday morning. She got, trained up last minute, and she jumped in and started talking with readers, and they had, whether it was questions on her, how she reported the story, she provided links to other things she worked on. One woman, I believe, had said that, I feel a little unsafe attending these events, given just the reaction towards them. And, Emily just was a great, she knew how to be a sympathetic ear, but she also was a voice of authority. She really helped readers see that, our reporters, they're there, which is something that readers don't always know, that we are not just writing from New York, that we're stationed across not just the country, but the world, and that we're really trying to understand what it is that's happening there. Like, you'll see that where she's talking to Kate C directly. And, given that all the changes with Twitter, social media is tough. It's not a platform. Like, these platforms are not for everyone. And I'm the first to say, I don't even have a lot of personal accounts, because sometimes I need to take breaks. So we really encourage reporters to say, well, use our platform to have a conversation that actually is, again, a safe and productive space. And in that story, also embedded, Emily had come to me last year and had said, hey, I'm starting to cover the South. She used to be a congressional reporter in DC. She was like, obviously, I'm doing my research. She covers 8 states, I want to say. But she was like, I want to really do the South justice. And historically, the joke is the Times really good with coastal coverage. We're not always historically the best with other regions. And we both had the concern of, we want to make sure that we are representing the South, not in a caricature, not condescendingly, in a way that really speaks to a textured part of the country. And so we worked up this call out of what matters to you in the South, share your ideas. And it was something we really wanted to frame sensitively, because we didn't want readers to feel like, well, why are you asking to do your work for, why are we doing the work for you? And again, it didn't want to feel like, oh, look at this cute little region, we just want to understand it better. Like, none of that. Really just saying one person is trying to really dig into lots of complex things, and she may not know every detail of your community. How could she? So she wanted to get your help. Wow, the cat's really in. So we wrote this up, and I'm so happy to say this published last May. I think we're at over 1,000 responses of people really sharing lots of cool things happening. And she definitely reads them. I read them. They're great fodder for ideas in the future. And I definitely want more. I've talked with other reporters and launching them for their regions as well.
Excellent. Patty, responding to your previous post, says, wow, beautiful hip hop history. And we have lots of folks watching. Here's George Matthew watching from Goa in India. Welcome, George. And Mary C. Curtis, former guest on the show, says, great conversation as usual, tuning in from Charlotte, North Carolina. As a New York Times alum, appreciate the efforts to be more inclusive. And we often hear that from former Times people that they have seen that change over time. And that's great. Walter Greason, great former guest here, says, be sure to read The Black Reparations Project, the best nonfiction book winner for University of California Press. And so please check that out. And Walter, thank you always, as well as Mary, for being great supporters of this show. So, folks, we have about 45 minutes left with Fahima, and we have, I think, about 3 hours it takes to read the paper, but we're going to speed it up and make sure that we get her take on what we're seeing in the paper. So, here is the front page of the New York Times. I've torn out my address here. That's why it looks like that. And we'll just kind of talk through the paper, and then she'll jump in on any headlines or stories, or shout out to any of her colleagues who she'd like to do. Otherwise, I'll just keep going through this. So, doubts in Israel about fulfilling dual war goals. Progress has slowed. Dilemma over priority. Destroying Hamas or freeing hostages. In the GOP, anti-Trumpers see a last shot, face long odds in vote in New Hampshire. And inside the crusade against DEI, America is under attack. A conservative activist took aim at woke. And you're seeing many of the ways in which thousands of documents obtained through public records requests offer a glimpse at the views and motives of opponents of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs.
And I just want to say that graphic really speaks to, I think, how much the Times has changed over the years. Like, this is, it's a way, one, it's not only like, that's something that it's an interactive that you would see online that would feel really dynamic, but the idea that this was still put in print and it still has that kind of feel where you look at it and you think like, this doesn't feel like just a typical visual. The fact that it's highlighted, the fact that there's just a lot of visual interest there, despite it being honestly more text, right? It still feels like a very visual approach.
Yes, it certainly does. Let's go in here and see. This is the story we discussed in detail. So if you missed this conversation about 10, 15 minutes ago, she explained in detail how the story came about, and this section, or this feature called Across the Country, and we even compared the headlines from the print and online versions. Radio outlet broadcasts rage of a battered city, and this is about Kharkiv in Ukraine. And allegations of office romance snarl the Trump case in Georgia. And this is about Fani T. Williams and Nathan J. Wade, who is seen here at a conference together.
That was a national story. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. And that's obviously something we've been covering a lot this last week. Talk about interest on search and social. People can't seem to get enough of, obviously the interference case in Georgia has been a big one, but this idea of now this romantic element between these two people, our reporters have been they've been staying on it and just reporting about it with a lot of integrity too, because when you're talking about people's personal lives, it can get pulpy really fast. And it's still thinking about, like, it's rooted in reporting and rooted in, okay, so what does this mean for the larger, for the case itself?
We're looking here at pages 2 and 3, which are specifically curated, and we had an editor talk about how they do this at the Times. And here are 4 films to stream on Netflix right now. Let me know if you've seen any of them. Boys in the Hood, Chicken Run. This is the sequel to Chicken Run. It's like 15, 20 years later. 23 years later, they made the sequel to that. Gravity and Wonder Woman are the 4 movies they're recommending on Netflix. And they also have a mini crossword here. And you're not interrupting, Fahima. Jump in anytime you like. Here's Taiwan's faith in U.S. waivers as tensions with China rise. Japanese spacecraft land on the moon, but its mission may be short-lived, and it becomes the 4th country to land on the moon. Early clue to coronavirus from China was overlooked, then deleted. And here are more international stories. Protests against far right gain new urgency as party ascends in Germany. And stories about Syria, Israel, burial near Marx costs what market will bear. So I guess at the Highgate Cemetery, the resting place for Karl Marx, along with George Michael and 170,000 other Londoners, is running out of space. Highgate is resorted to reusing graves to add plots. Whoa, what a
That's
story.
also, that headline just feels like a classic.
Oh, great headline.
Yeah, just like a play on words. It's really, I mean, it takes a topic that is not always, I mean, when you're talking about a market, like not necessarily the easiest thing to talk about. And it's a very clever headline, and it uses space really judiciously because it's not long at all.
I love it. As missiles strike, a radio outlet broadcasts the raids is a story from the front. And now we're at the national stories, highlighting their race in essays for college. Affirmative action ban gets some to change admission strategies. Now it feels like people of color have to say something, or if we don't, we're going to get looked over, says Trinity Parker, 16, who aspires to be the first doctor in her family.
Yeah, so Bernard wrote that. He is one of our news assistants, and I believe this, and he has a background in education before he joined the Times, and I think this is his first story for the desk. And our weekend editor Christine had worked with him, really shaping this story. I was not directly involved, but there was just so much conversation after affirmative action ended of how do students share their identities, like how do they talk about what's going on in their lives beyond a resume or a test score. So I thought that story really captured these conversations that kids are having when they apply to college.
Here's a story I've seen in different formats in different media outlets. Turns out that those witty highway signs about speeding and things like that are now being discouraged because it turns out that things that might be, like we were just talking about that Marx headline, right? Like where you're being clever, sometimes it's not clear, especially as you have various kinds of folks driving. So this is a story, I would have thought it would be kind of much bigger in the paper, but here it is.
Yeah, so it's funny. I'm so glad to the Express desk of this, and I had flagged it to our national desk a few times because I'm obsessed with those signs. I'm not a driver myself, but obviously we've seen them all on the highway. And like you had mentioned, a lot of outlets, they were writing about it because it is definitely the kind of story that people would want to click on. And ultimately, I'm really glad that Express did it, and they had a funny headline as well. Because again, you don't want a straightaway news headline on something like that.
Fahima,
Sure.
I'm going to ask you to clarify. You mentioned Express earlier as well. What is Express for our viewers?
Yeah, so there are breaking news desk. Obviously, all of us across the newsroom, we handle breaking news, but they are at the forefront of it. They're really, all of them, it's a team of, I actually don't know, I mean, maybe more, but they're really thoughtful about looking at what's happening, and they jump on stories the quickest out of anyone in the newsroom, where they're looking at, okay, is this a viral conversation happening? Is this a shooting that's about to unfold? Is this a weather moment about to unfold? And so they often do, they take the first cut of a story, and then they talk with the rest of us across other desks and say, okay, we wrote this story. We think this might become something bigger. And now, do we need to have a conversation about more coverage? So Express, they're the first people on stories, and they handle a lot of these like talkers, a lot of these like social based stories that people really are interested in.
Great, thank you.
Biden campaign sharpens its post-Roe message. I mean, it's fascinating, Fahima, as not a political statement, but just to see that 3 of the politicians in the news these days are South Asian. This is something your parents, I'm sure, could never have expected. Kamala Harris as a VP, and Nikki Haley has a chance to be at least second in the race in New Hampshire. Of course, Vivek Ramaswamy has rightly left the stage, but he thinks he'll be vice president, so who knows. But it's so different from when I grew up, for sure.
Oh, yeah. There is no question about that.
Trump brings bluster to court. Judges try to rein him in. And here is an expanded version of what we saw on that front page. So you're saying about use of graphics and quotes and pulling things out here. And this is the cane story. And there's the cane from the story that we discussed earlier. We're just going to flip through this, see if there are any other stories here. Haley's pitch recalls bygone era before Trump's rise, and Trump uses dog whistle to spotlight Haley's race. And this is something that, my personal opinion, whatever you think of her, talking about her race, her background, making fun of her name is not appropriate in any way. Harvard defends its review of plagiarism accusations against former president. This is a Uvalde story. Police errors in Uvalde underscore challenges. And grand jury to examine response to massacre. And
yeah,
here's
that was a huge story this week, just given the 600-page report that was released this week. And I mean, everyone knew at this point that the Uvalde police response, the many parents, many other officials, they felt it was deeply unsatisfying, and DOJ agreed with that. They called it a failure. And our reporters who had spent so much time, Edgar, who had spent time in Uvalde reporting so many stories when it first happened, and really spending time and gaining trust with the families and the victims, coming back and writing again. And I think David Goodman also wrote these stories, and Kim Murphy, who edits them. They just spent a lot of time going through, 600 pages to go through that report. And really, they helped me. And because we were thinking about, we ended up uploading the full document online. So if anyone wants to read 600 pages, they can. But they had looked at specific excerpts, trying to identify, okay, are there specific points throughout this document that a reader would really need to know? Ultimately, we decided, best to upload the entire thing. But it was definitely a conversation of how do we help readers make sense of something that is so dense?
Here we're looking at the obituary section, and I know you know Amy Padnani, who was a guest on this show. Amy was creator of the Overlooked series in the Times obituaries. And so we're looking at the obituaries today. Tanya Berezin, behind the scenes off-Broadway force, dies at 82. Brian Barzik, 54, reptile evangelist who attracted millions on YouTube and TikTok. I was born with a reptile gene because it's just in me. Menachem Daum is a filmmaker who explored the world of Hasidim. And Robert Rosenthal, 90, a psychologist who linked subtle cues to behavior. And let's see here. Are you a sports fan?
I do love soccer. I grew up watching that, and basketball because I grew up in New York, but can't say I know much about football.
Okay. Yeah, it's football season, it seems, even though we are in basketball season as well. And here's all the merch. Do you folks get a discount to all the merch, or do you get
We
freebies?
do. And I will say, I recently, my boss, we threw a cute little baby shower at work, and I wanted to get her a New York Times onesie, but they were all sold out. So clearly they're popular.
Someone's buying them. Yeah. So let's go here. We just wanted to show kind of the power. Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you just to show off one of the things that I got for my birthday. The New York Times front pages from June 9th throughout the years. Sri and my team at Digimentors sent me this, among other things. New York Times merch is pretty cool. I just wanted to pop in and say that.
Yeah, that's lovely that you have it there. There you go. Here, I was just going to show the New York Times, what it's like to see, 6-column headline, and the impact of this is from Saturday's paper. Let's quickly look here. This is a powerful story from Nick Kristof. Bill was a good man, then he committed a terrible crime, a friend and a life as complicated as America. And you can see this very powerful image right here on the front page of the opinion section, and how Nikki Haley can be dangerous. January 6th cannot go down the memory hole. And why wasn't DeSantis the guy? I read this earlier. And here are what 17 of Trump's best people said about him. You might remember that he said he hires only the best people. And of course, some of them turned out to be far from best. Squaring a life, a brutal crime, and a man. Bill owned his choices, but his story shows what happens when we let Americans fall behind. And this has been a theme that Nick has covered often about how so many Americans are forgotten, left behind. He wrote a whole book about this with his wife Cheryl Wu Dunn, and I encourage you to read the story. The Hidden Lesson of American Fiction. This is a new movie that's out. Often black people prod white people to define us by our pain. Netanyahu is turning against Biden. And the economic indicator we need, a candy bar. Snickers shows that humans don't think about inflation rationally. There's been a lot of stories about how things are expensive at Five Guys or McDonald's. Putin is making his plans brutally clear. I think they've been clear for 2 years. 2 lessons from an ancient text that changed my life. Every gesture of recognition marries love, humility, and vulnerability. Peak TV was fun while it lasted. Netflix and HBO once regularly broke new ground. No longer. So that's an interesting thing. Fahima, we discussed The Sopranos, and that's considered the start of peak TV. So, what are things you're watching now?
What am I watching? I will say I did watch American Fiction. I went to the theaters and it was a fantastic movie. Not only was it really funny, it was also very moving. I wasn't expecting that. I really want to start True Detective. I know that the season 4 premiered last Sunday. I still have not watched, but it's high on my list. And honestly, I've been I've been watching old seasons of Project Runway, which is very embarrassing. I talk about like legacy TV, peak TV. I honestly have been falling down on TV, so I'm gonna stick with my True Detective answer and get back on like watching good TV for a change.
Any comments about Sunday Styles? Please jump in. Facing the Wilds in stealth mode. Weekend warriors prepare for scary times. These are people who
I
think,
assume day preppers, yeah.
these are people who are ready for the end of the world. Happily Ever isn't the goal. Nadia of Pussy Riot and John Caldwell dream of a more just world. And these are newlyweds who aim to help others. Sweetie, I'll return to pick you up at 2 a.m. Some parents anxious about letting a child stay in another home opt for sleep unders. So here's a trend story in the New York Times, right? So this is the joke, right? Like three friends are doing this and it becomes a story in the Times, but this must be something that this new generation of parents are doing. We didn't have a name for it. If we ever got a call from our kids wanting to come home, but we never called it sleep unders.
Yeah, that's funny. I wonder if it's like the parents feeling anxiety and thinking, well, I want my kid to be home, or the kid saying, I want to come home. Because I have
Yeah.
not read that story, but
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Clown cardio can't take exercise too seriously. So another trend in fitness. Happily Ever After, is that a story? And then exposing the bare essentials of a relationship. This is fascinating. The Modern Love column, which many of you know, we had Daniel Jones, the editor of Modern Love, on Valentine's Day a couple of years ago. Social
Dan is also, I'm sorry, Modern Love is truly one of my favorite columns. I read it every week. And I used to work with Dan and Mia a lot. They on ideas, we've done tiny love stories. We've done they're so receptive, and they really are. When I think about one of the most beloved columns, I mean, the TV show, the book, and they're just a great team.
And of course, we had Dan as a guest on our show on Valentine's Day, no less, a few years ago. Definitely one of the highlights that we've had. Another guest that we had, you were talking about shows to watch. We actually just started watching True Detective. Went back to the first season. Really interesting, kind of crazy, but really interesting. But Martin Englisher shared a comment. Harlan Coben's "Fool Me Once" is also a good show. We are also in the middle of that. And he was a guest on our show a couple years ago as well. I think in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, Sri, that was another epic show that we did.
Sure, that was
Um,
really really great when we had him in the height of the pandemic. It was wonderful.
I
All of
want to bring
Marlon's
in
shows are they're so easy to watch. I've watched many of them. They're very, very fast on Netflix.
before we move on back on that article about the sleep unders, Sri. Um, Dr. Tachi has an interesting comment. Listen,
Oh
as an
yeah.
African child, there's no such thing as sleep over. You stay in your own bed, which I think is interesting. And at least just from our experience, we actually have one of my daughter's friends sleeping over last night. They're still in the other room. They need to be quiet until 10 a.m. until the show's over. But it's a different. Some parents are not comfortable, they're not there yet in terms of letting their kids sleep over. And unless you have really good trust, we have great relationships with some of Emily's friends and her parents. I can certainly understand the hesitancy around doing that. I know a lot of friends of mine growing up who never did sleepovers. Their parents
Oh,
just
I was gonna say,
wouldn't do it.
as a Bangla kid, there was no way. My parents were like, absolutely not. You will come home. I was
Yeah,
allowed once a year for Halloween, and that was truly I was a treat, and that only happened once a year.
yeah, sweet. What about you? Sleepovers?
Yeah, we had sleepovers growing up myself, and then with the kids, we had twins who are now 20. When they were young, they got to go to sleepovers, and they loved them.
Hmm,
So
cool.
here is a brisk reminder to on how to dress for snow. And we heard earlier that Fahima likes winter, so even this winter. And so I don't know if she's seen this section yet, or this feature yet, but here are some very stylish people, including some showing skin. My goal is to cover up every single
Hmm.
inch. I was in Scandinavia over the winter, and so I was able to get really warm clothes that I'm able to use and are very, very helpful. We had one of the WOW's column writers from the Times join us as well, Kate Doughty, and we talked about the wedding section here. And you can see lots of ways in which there's diversity of all kinds, including diversity of clothing and attire for weddings. And by the way, I'm now listening to the 1619 Project on Spotify has audiobooks. I didn't know that, and I'm listening to that now. And I had skimmed through the book back in the day, but now listening to it is very, very powerful. Here is the Sunday business cover. Farmers had it, billionaires wanted it. And this is about a town or an area in California that developers wanted to buy and turn into their own city, build a city from scratch. And some people said no. Some farmers said no. We may be dodging a recession, but risks remain. And then how do I pay for college is a special section. There are few challenges facing students more daunting than applying for and paying for college. We are here to help. Tell us about your college experience and how you looked at your education, your higher education days, Fahima.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I love this package. I really want to dig into it because education is a big topic for the National Desk. Not just obviously what's been going on with the Ivy Leagues, but in general, higher education, K through 12. Those are topics that cut across so many different demographics. And I love this package because it really speaks to this tangible, if you do want to go to college, how do you even get there? Talk about service journalism that really helps you understand, like, this is a guide, this is clear, this is information you can trust. And it really speaks to the idea that not everyone automatically has family wealth or has the means to go to school, but there are other ways to try and approach it. For me, I went to school in DC. I went to undergrad at American University. It's funny, I had never visited the school. I went sight unseen. They gave me the most money. It was purely a financial decision. So it's something, I certainly have experience in feeling, even at that age, you think, what kind of costs are worth me incurring? And I knew I wanted to study journalism. DC is a great town for that. So I honestly, I cared about school, but I cared a lot about my internships, and I cared a lot about what real world kind of vocational work I was doing. And that's why I love journalism too. Like, it's not about where you went to school or the grades you had. Of course, you should take pride in where you went. You should, take pride in your work. But I really appreciate how it's about the work that you are actually doing and not just the idea of talking about something. And so, yeah, I interned a lot. I interned at Washington Post, which is where I first started working once I graduated from college. And that honestly only happened because I was in the building already interning, really, really just being in the mix versus, thinking about journalism as this idea of something. So, I loved college, but I definitely really, when I think about my nieces and nephews or people that are younger, of like, what is it that you want to be doing and how do you get there? Versus thinking about it in a classroom per se.
Excellent advice. I also want to tell folks that we have this special section on the Digimentors website. Just look for the New York Times Read Along. We have a PDF of it, so that's available to you. So please take a look. And we also have a special section, the 52 places to visit this year. That's also available as a PDF on digimentors.group. So please check those out. We just have a few minutes left with Fahima Haque. She's the national audiences editor of the New York Times. And folks, please continue to post your questions and comments. And please follow her on Twitter, Fahima_Haque. And I do have to ask about Twitter. What is your attitude towards it? How much are you using it for work? And has it changed since things have melted down over there?
I still use it a lot, even though it's definitely chaotic, but I go into it knowing that it's chaotic. I mean, I will say I don't really tweet anymore. Before, I felt like when it was still a platform, before the Musk days, where I definitely tweeted a lot more. Now I'm more of a lurker. I mean, I still love it you mentioned like inflation and how the cost of things are just so expensive. You mentioned Five Guys, and I saw a hilarious tweet on exactly that. So like I still love it for the chaos. And I am sure that it will change shape again very soon. I mean, we all thought last year when the World Cup was happening that it was going to implode right after the finale and finals, and it didn't, right? So it's still useful and I still value it, but I fully recognize why many folks are, approach it with a lot of caution. And that's precisely why I don't tweet anymore.
Here's the arts and leisure section. Interesting cover story here. Leave the poor princess alone. Fictional reincarnations of Diana are everywhere decades after her death. Even icons deserve more time to rest in peace. And I've just been watching The Crown, so I understand why somebody may suggest that. In this section also, they have a whole thing about the 50 years of Happy Days, and we both agreed that we liked the show, and we were both fans. It also spun off shows that people may not know, like Mork and Mindy and Laverne and Shirley, was also from this particular show. And there's the Fonz. He's great, by the way, Henry Winkler. If you haven't seen him in Barry, which is on HBO, and he's amazing in it. And The Emotional Journey of Origin, and this is about how Ava DuVernay has adapted Isabel Wilkerson's cast. The book cast has been turned into the movie Origin. So I was interested in the marketing of that. Cast is a book that was a bestseller and so well known, and why they chose a different title. And here's Poetry Among Miles of Strip Malls. That's an interesting headline. And let's take a look at the magazine. And any thoughts on the magazine before we dive in?
Honestly, I'm a fan. I just actually, it takes me forever to read the stories because it's just, these are like truly a treat to open them up. I recently read one about terminal care with those with anorexia. And it was very intense, but really well reported, really sensitively done, and worth taking the time. But it definitely was something I bookmarked for a while.
And the cover, by the way, is the whale who went AWOL. His name is Vladimir, but it starts with an H. Maybe that is the pronunciation. I'm not sure. But here is the latest patch of reality being intruded on by the internet, a 9-month round-the-world cruise. I also read about a 3-year cruise where they couldn't get a boat, but people had sold their homes and decided to go on this cruise for 3 years, but there was no boat that they could secure for that. So this is a 9-month cruise. And are you a cruiser?
I am not a cruiser. Not going to yuck anyone's yum, but I am not a cruiser.
Andrea's mom thinks climate activists need to radicalize. I want sabotage to happen on a much larger scale. This is the interview, the Q&A that's done by David Marchese. And The Ethicist is by Kwame Anthony Appiah. Does prenatal testing for Down syndrome amount to eugenics? Wow, that's a very powerful question. I want to read this afterwards. Is this something
I also truly love that column. I mean,
Yeah.
the way that he really dispenses thoughtful advice to such difficult questions, and it always shocks me what's going on in people's lives, because they're always nuts.
And here's a letter of recommendation of 15-minute journals. I started to think more deeply about the sites we've taken for granted, the things that slip the attention of social media's endless cataloging. If you really want to understand our era, you've got to take notes. That's in praise of notebooks. And what about food? Are you a cook? Foodie?
Yes, I love cooking and baking. I love NYT's cooking and food section. I actually, it was peak pandemic where I got to write a recipe. I used one of my mom's recipes and got to test it, and it was published. And it was honestly so exciting, because I've never like written a recipe. That's like an aspect of journalism I had never experienced. And the team, they're so wonderful. I love what they do. I use NYT cooking plenty. Like made the cookies. Like I'm such a big fan.
And this is so people go, if you have the cooking app, look for the recipe, and here it is, Mughlai paratha.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites growing up. So
that's great. Well done. This is about the whale named Vladimir, and he escaped from after escaping captivity, he took up residence in Hammerfest, Norway, where he quickly became an international celebrity. He's a beluga whale that disappeared.
Those are great photos too.
Yeah, exactly. The right subject here. Whales and dolphins are basically the last animals on Earth that have to perform 7 days a week until they die. Wow, that's really tough. The rise of a group chat that has brought something psychologically new into the world, talking about to all of your friends all of the time, forever. And this is one of the things that we're seeing, people moving away from social media into group chats on WhatsApp or iMessage or things like that.
Well, and it's funny, because I'm doing the same. I also, when we think about in terms of audience, a big focus of mine is getting stories that people want to share. And to me, it's the biggest compliment that if you read something that you like so much of ours, that you're like, I need to share it with my community, that I want to immediately text it to a friend or email it to a friend, especially again, as social platforms are not always ideal, that's something we really want to encourage, that like, is our story good enough for you to say, yeah, someone in my life needs to read this now.
The Braid, for decades, struggles over civil rights helped unite America's progressive Jews with black activists. The Palestinian cause has revived that alliance and also created new tensions. And you're seeing some great images here of this. And then here are all these games. What are you playing any of the New York Times games?
Oh yeah, I play Wordle and Connections every day. I often do the mini. Everdeen Mason, who runs the games team, who came from the Washington Post, is wonderful. I had embedded with the crossword folks years ago to help them on, thinking about some of their strategy. I mean, they're just such a great team, and I truly have drank that Kool-Aid. Every day I play Wordle and Connections.
Excellent. I'm the last person who hasn't played Wordle, so
you'll get into it. I was a slow adopter, and now I don't not play it.
Okay. We have just a few more sections and about 10 minutes more with Fahima Haque. Folks, post your questions and comments. She's the national audiences editor of the New York Times. And please share this. Even though we have only 10 minutes left, they'll be able to watch on various platforms, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and on Digimentors.group. And please go to Digimentors.group and take a look at the read-along section. You'll find lots of great PDFs that we've been given by editors at the Times with permission to share with all of you. And of course, check out the work of Digimentors there as well, my company. And here is the book review. To Die For, in his debut novel, Martyr, the poet Kaveh Akbar turns a grieving young man's search for meaning into a piercing family saga.
Yeah, I really want to read that book, and
Yeah.
I had read that story just a couple days ago to feature in Race Related. It looks really great, and people are excited for it.
Here is Amy's book, Stories, Photos Celebrating Diverse, Remarkable People in Overlooked. And you can see our episode with her from November if you folks go into the archives. And here's Janice Y.K. Lee in a Q&A. And Roastmaster, Bracing Anthology collects how Christopher Hitchens' work for the London Review of Books. Hitchin Time. And you see a lot of Chris Hitchens stuff on YouTube Shorts and on Twitter. And so even though he has passed, his work lives on, especially because he was a very dynamic speaker. So people love showing that. And this is the book that Juno Diaz has reviewed by Kaveh Akbar. Just kidding. The authors of 2 new books argue the culture wars worries about what's laughing. Wait. The authors of 2 books argue that culture war worries about what's a laughing matter have been overplayed. And so, comedy book, How Comedy Conquers Culture and the Magic That Makes It Work by Jesse David Fox, and Outrageous as History of Showbiz and the Culture Wars by Cliff Nestoroff. We'll just keep flipping through here. This is Literary Destinations, talking about visiting the city of Lima in Peru. So much to read here. I saw a comment earlier by Patty saying she collects the Times book reviews and the magazine to read later. And I do that as well. I'll sometimes be on a flight and I'll carry old copies of the New Yorker and the Times magazine.
Yeah, I have a suitcase full of old New Yorkers in my parents' house that's truly a decade old that I think I need to accept. I'm probably not going to read them, but
the amazing part is you could read.
That's why they're still there. And my parents have enough space. So my mom routinely will be like, can I throw these out? And I still say, no, there is a universe in which I will read these.
All right. Let me know if you've read any of these. We're just going to look at the top 5 fiction and nonfiction books. Fiction is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Iron Flame, number 2, is also by Rebecca Yarros. And then The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride.
I do want to read that. I have not read it.
Icebreaker by Hannah Grace, and First Lie Wins by Ashley Elton. I'm sorry to say I don't know most of these authors, especially someone who has 2 books on the number 1 and 2. Nonfiction, The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown, Oath and Honor by Liz Cheney, The Wager by David Gran, and Killers of the Flower Moon, which is a big movie now, also by David Gran, and The Woman in Me by Britney Spears.
I mean, I did listen to the audiobook and it was fantastic. Michelle Williams did a great job narrating. And obviously there's been a lot, I mean, so much coverage about Britney Spears over the decades. And we had that fantastic, powerful documentary a couple of years ago. Just really speaks to, she was put through a lot by society. And it's great that has gotten a chance to speak from, using her own voice, especially after the conservatorship has ended. So that book, I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, and there've been articles written about Michelle Williams's reading of the book.
Yeah.
So that's how I knew she had done that. The Metropolitan section, we should remind people, is available in print only to people who subscribe to the print paper. So some of you are in other places can only see this on the New York Times read along. Every Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern, with fantastic guests. Here is A Giant Step to an Offshore Energy Future. This is the South Fork Wind in Long Island. And already a heavyweight in the cannabis market, the retired boxer Mike Tyson brings his brand to New York in a field awash in celebrities. And again, someone who grew up in New York, as did you, I'm sure you now hear people complaining that when they come into Manhattan, there's smell of cannabis everywhere.
Oh, I have not heard that complaint.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I feel like cities always, I can't say that was something I've even noticed myself.
Okay. Claims of tampering mar a Connecticut city's elections, and Metropolitan Diary is still popular, even though there are so many versions of this out there and so many other formats, but the Times still does it. And great photographs here of what's going on. And what's in a name? Serving the public for starters. A congressman and a leader in the city's public housing community cross paths. This is Hakeem Jeffrey, and has a name that sounds a lot like the representative Hakeem Jeffrey. Sorry, this is Hakeem Jeffries. This is Hakeem Jeffrey. I made the mistake right here. And uh, name similar names, but they are crossing paths there. And real estate, are you a real estate watcher?
I was. I recently bought my first apartment, so I definitely learned a lot about real estate in the last year, and it's very confusing and often punitive. So I love our section, and I know you know Nikita Stewart, who runs the real estate section, is wonderful, and really thinks about writing stories that speak to lots of different types of homeowners or people who rent, and yeah, there's a lot that she thinks about that. I really enjoy the section.
Dizzying times for home seekers. Buyers are facing high prices, high interest rates, and low inventory. For renters, it looks a little different. So, I mean, people who don't live in New York, when they look at some of these numbers and what you get for a one bedroom, two bedroom, are stunned by this. And that's one of the ways in which New York City is different. So one of the things we want to do is just look through our comments, and also, are there any stories that you saw recently or saw this week that didn't end up in this print section?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many. Print is tough, right? You only have so much space. I feel like I'm constantly reading so many stories, but now, of course, I'm thinking, oh yeah, what didn't make it in the paper that I really loved? But there's so many.
Here's Jonathan saying, "I live in the East Village. There's always been the scent of weed
That's
everywhere."
exactly. It's always you always smell it. It's just, it's ever present.
Jonathan says Wordle makes me curdle. And Ellen says Wordle is the best. First thing I do every morning. And Patty says, thank you, Fahima, and the entire production team of the New York Times Read Along. Awesome and epic. And Ellen says, I miss Chris Hitchens the best. And I send the New York Times book reviews once a month to family in Europe. They are loved. So I guess that's the print section. She's putting the section and mailing it. I love that story. That's really, really cool. And Neil has been putting in, so if you look in the archives, this is on Facebook, he's been putting the links in so people can see that. And by the way, I now notice that the gift article feature, which is there and that's been on the Times there for a long time, see it in the Washington Post, see it in other places, and that's a really good way to get into reading stories behind paywalls.
One note on the gift article, I like that they use a different image. They highlight the fact that it's a gift article in the preview. But one thing I found, Sri, was that it actually only lasts for about 2 weeks. The link is only
Mm.
good for 2 weeks when you share a gift article.
And then it just goes back to behind the
It
paywall.
goes
That's
behind the paywall after that.
yeah,
So something to
interesting.
note. I do want
Yeah.
to bring in some comments from Twitter, Sri. So one thing we mentioned earlier, we're able to show comments from Twitter, but several folks have been replying to the live stream
Mhm.
in actual tweets, which we can't show on screen, can't bring on screen as cleanly, but we certainly can read them out, and I can actually share my screen just to give you a flavor of what's out there. In particular, I want to show uh, Kathleen Dunleavy's tweet. This is a great discussion on an early Southern California morning.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Kathleen.
Kathleen. And Shashi, several comments. Definitely, the New York Times read along definitely makes me read the New York Times for which I have a digital subscription, which is great. We're gonna have to pass that on to Tom Jolly. And he did share a picture, his view as an audience member. His
Thank you, Shashi. That's great that you did
tablet
that,
there.
and yeah, that's awesome that that's there. That's really, really cool. Folks, before we go, we are going to just give Fahima a moment to catch her breath before she gives us a final thought. We want to come back to you, Fahima, and if you can just give us some thoughts on on your work and things that you want to leave with our audience. Just a minute or so of thoughts. So we'll take you off camera for a moment. And Neil, a great show this week, and Fahima was terrific. And so we're so glad that we were able to have her with us.
Absolutely. I also want to mention that PK Sharma was watching on Instagram as well. So these are, as the show has evolved, we can bring in the comments from Twitter. We're live on Instagram, and it's just an incredible community that we have. Another great show. And I always describe our, the New York Times read along as an inside the Times look when we have Times writers and editors. But next week, we're going to be doing something special, Sri. We have Jeff Horwitz, who is our guest. He's the technology reporter for the Wall Street Journal. So this will be our first special WSJ read along, a Wall Street Journal read along. And he's the author of a new book, Broken Code Inside Facebook and the Fight to Expose Its Harmful Secrets. So I hope everyone has a chance to join us next week. We also want to do another shout out to our sponsor, MuckRack, for all the support they've given us over the years for the New York Times Read Along and other projects that Sri has been involved with. So thank you to MuckRack. And as a reminder, the show is produced by Digimentors, the company that Sri and his friend Andrew Lee co-founded several years ago. I'm proud to be a vice president of events and communications. We do digital marketing, produce events and digital programs like this, help with strategic communications, do trainings and workshops. We've done recruiting for various organizations. We also do event amplification and the latest Sri's AI workshops. As Sri likes to point out, he had hair many years ago. And well, I'll let him speak to what he has now. But thank you very much for everyone who has supported all the work that we've done, all the projects, and this show, which, again, Sri started somewhat on a whim. I don't know how much thought you put into it when you first did it. Uh, Back, it was October in 8 years ago. So back quite a while, and it's really just evolved since then. We're seeing some great comments from folks who have been watching the show. So thank you.
Thank you, Neil. And let's bring Fahima back to give us some closing thoughts. Folks, Fahima is the national audiences editor of the New York Times. She's been so generous with her time being with us here on a Sunday morning. So thank you, Fahima. And back to you.
Thank you for having me. This was such a fun chat, and it's really heartening to see such a earnest and sweet community that they are often signing on at 5:30 in the morning to learn more about this week's paper and to hear from people like me. I guess my closing thought is just really as we head into what will be an intense election year, really valuing local news as well. I love the Times. I've worked at the Times for 7 years. I grew up in New York. It was always a paper I wanted to work at. But I also really value what's happening, like local outlets, smaller newsrooms. Journalism is a tough industry. A lot of people, they don't subscribe or they don't read as often as I would like selfishly. So, for all of you listening, I would say, appreciate the Times love, but also, maybe subscribe to an outlet that you don't necessarily like, a smaller one that you may not have thought of, or reading a local paper in a community outside of yours. You can learn a lot about a place, and those reporters, they know their towns often better than a lot of national outlets that we try to, but we just don't have that kind of scope. So I'm always in support of local journalism.
Thank you. Very important point. And we encourage all our readers to support other news organizations around the world. And we are very grateful to you, Fahima, for joining us. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll be back next Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern, with a special Wall Street Journal read along with my former student, Jeff Horwitz. We had mentioned Adil Hassan, by the way, earlier today. He got a shout out, also a former student. So it's great to talk about media and journalism, fighting disinformation any way we can. Thank you very much. and we'll see you all next week. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a great day and a great week.